Hello, and welcome to the World Lens podcast, where once a week we take a look at what's happening through a global business perspective. I am not Michelle Evans. Instead, my name is Curtis Sprung, and I am normally the behind-the-scenes producer of this fine podcast, but I'm stepping into the mic role today. Thankfully, I'm joined by seasoned podcast guest Bruce McIndoe, president of McIndoe Risk Advisory and WTCI board member. Welcome, Bruce.
Welcome, Curtis, the voice of the show, right?
Thank you for having me. All right, so let's just get right into it. Last week, you and Michelle discussed Japan, and this week we're talking India. And recently, India has signed a free trade agreement with the European Free Trade Association. Now, a little context here, because I was actually not super familiar with the European Free Trade Association. This is a group of 4 countries, Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, that operates in parallel with the European Union. So these countries are not EU members, but they do participate in the European single market. Now, did I get all that right, Bruce? And is there any other important context to that EFTA that we should know about before kind of jumping in here?
Sure. So actually, Switzerland participates in the European single market, not through EFTA, which is yet another, alphabet soup, which they never ratified. But they do it through other trade relations that they have. But the other 3 members do have, direct access to that market. But this whole area is literally alphabet soup, right? You've got probably at least half a dozen trade, agreements and programs that are going on. But this is an important one, and India is an important, country, and we'll talk more about that. But I think that the interesting thing about EFTA, is it only represents 14 million people. That's it.
Wow.
With a combined economic output, and this is the wow part, $1.4 trillion.
Okay.
So if we want to wonder why the per capita GDP and wealth of those nations is off the charts, there you go. They export about $1 trillion, and they what represent 1% 1% or less, of the world's population, but they rank in the top 10 for services and merchandise trade. So small but mighty.
Small but mighty. Good to know. Thank you for expanding on that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, because this deal that was signed by EFTA and India, it comes, I think I read a couple articles that said this is after like 16 years.
Yeah, I don't think they've gotten that. It's 15 or 16, but go ahead.
It's many years of
21 rounds.
Yeah. So this has really been in the works for a long time coming. Why are we seeing something finally getting pen to paper here now?
Well, 2 things. One is negotiating a trade deal like this is complicated. It's not just trade. It's human rights. It's visa, changes and relaxation. It's, how to resolve disputes and all those kinds of things. But they added some things in here that were new, right? And but intellectual property, on and on. So it's a huge document. I think it was like 14 chapters. Yeah, that was what it was. 14 chapters at this thing. So that's been going on and on and on. And Modi has, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India, was kind of like bragging on the prior, governments for not getting this done. Right? It's been going on for a long time. He's coming up for a re-election and put the full court press on this to get this signed, which they did. Now that has to be ratified by all 5 parties, right? So now we're talking probably more like 2025 before it actually comes into effect. But with that, it's just, I would say just his like pressure to make it happen. And he was hoping to get UK done. UK was one of the founding members of EFTA in 1960, right? They left when they joined the EU, and then Brexit, are trying to come back in. But so he was trying to get a bunch of things done so he can tout this great success.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So he's up for election. We're
Hmm.
getting this deal signed now. Pretty exciting. And you mentioned that there are, some new things in this deal that we haven't seen before. There's a bunch of different, pieces to this. So let's just kind of go piece by piece and take a look at the different areas of this.
Hmm.
And I was reading about it. One thing that they mentioned is that professionals in
Hmm.
fields, and I think two of the fields they mentioned were nursing specifically and like architects,
Hmm.
can take jobs in the EFTA zone and be able to go back and forth. Is this one of the a standard agreement for these types of deals? And does this mean then that those four EFTA countries are going to see an influx of Indian professionals coming over and working there?
Hmm. Yeah. So these things are, I guess, great examples of what makes trade deals really hard to negotiate, right? Neither party, wants to like open up their market and have like cheap goods or cheap labor flood in and impact jobs and those kinds of things. So yeah, it is
Right.
really hard, right? In this particular agreement, there were like, I guess, about 150 service areas that were put on the table. So that gives you some idea of grinding through each one of those and what's the impact of letting nurses come into a particular country. And you've got four countries, and you can have variations for each country. So it's just, lots of stuff, right? But they
Yeah.
did about 120. So it's not just nursing and that. Accounting, audit, IT, healthcare, the nurses, but broad there. So that's really important. The visa, getting visas, allowing spouses to come and work, because all of these parameters are part of this. So I think that's really key. But I think one that I saw when I was digging into that chapter was that they're going to recognize at different levels professional diplomas from India. So, like, if a medical doctor in India comes to the U.S., they don't recognize that medical license, that medical degree, right? So,
Right.
yeah. So this is again huge.
Okay. Yeah. This does seem like a significant change over there.
It is a
Does this
significant trade agreement. There's no question.
does this kind of suggest then that there were the EFTA countries were hurting for folks to be nurses, to be architects, or I know I hate to bring this up when we're talking about something that's completely different, but folks coming over, there's that rhetoric of stealing our jobs, right? Are we going to see something like that happen over there? I mean,
So when you
I
talk
don't know
about
yet.
trade,
Yeah,
you talk ultimately around demographics, right?
right.
Because people are ultimately what generates demand, and consumer consumes these right products and services. So these countries are aging countries. And Japan, as we talked about last week, that's the bleeding edge, right, of a country that is substantially aged, and their population is contracting, right? So developed countries need younger professional workers to sustain their economies and even if they can hold their GDP, that's great. If they can have more productivity with technology and other things, and continue to grow GDP in a shrinking demographic population, great. And that's what Japan's trying to do. But yeah, so it's important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So another aspect of this, and I believe that I read that this is, maybe the first of its kind in one of these major trade deals, was that the EFTA countries are going to invest $100 billion over 15 years
Hmm.
in India.
Hmm.
And do we have any idea what sectors in India are going to benefit from this, really significant investment?
uh, yeah, well, it's a huge commitment, right, to
Yeah.
investing in the infrastructure of India. But it's also a recognition by this group and others that this is where the action is going to be in the years ahead. right? India is going to be the third big rising economy, and you know, potentially has the potential to surpass China down the road and even the U.S. So potential. Anyway, so everyone wants to be in there. As far as like key industries, it's going to be you know people are going to invest in India and where their strength is, right? So pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, automobiles, information technology, those kinds of things that not only will be a direct foreign direct investment in India, but will also benefit the people that are making those investments, right? And getting, basically, tying capital to India and seeing it grow. It's just like being in the stock market, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the first of its kind, in these trade deals, this investment kind of back and forth, right?
yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things, when I read a couple articles where that was one of the key, big, long things that they had to work through, because India was demanding that they wanted this investment. They need this investment to grow their economy, right? And so, it is, it's a difficult thing because it was brand new. It's not something now, as I understand it, this investment is triggered by achievement of certain trade growth and those kinds of things. It's not just a commitment that over 15 years they're going to dribble 100 million in, but it's still substantial, and obviously they think it's achievable to have that investment.
Yeah. So what kind of framework is this establishing for future trade deals, if at all? I mean, are we going to look at this and, when we're starting to negotiate something, 10, 15 years down the line, go like, yeah, we gotta
Oh,
get
well, I
our
think it's
claws
going
in
to
there.
be any trade deal that's negotiations are open right now. And I think any future deal, developing countries need investment capital. And so this will definitely be on the table and will be people, the developing country that's entering a trade agreement will be pushing for this. They, just like when I get concessions in labor negotiations, and then it's like, hey, they got that, we want it too, right? So yeah, I think you'll see it ripple.
Interesting. Interesting. And then, of course, when we're talking about trade deals like this, lowering trade barriers is a major part of it. I think I read online, it was an interview with one of the Norwegian
Mm-hmm.
folks that was negotiating the deal that says, their exporters face taxes up to 40%, and this
Yeah.
is going to take that number down to zero for most Norwegian products.
Mm-hmm.
So, what kinds of products are the Indian consumers going to see that are either going to, drop in price, or they're going to see way more of flood the country now?
Sure. Well, it's not just Norway. Obviously, for Norway beating the drums, they want to say how wonderful this is to make it easier to sell goods in India. So it's all four countries. Each one, I think, has different terms. In the agreements.
Right.
Switzerland also, conveying that you know the tariffs are going to go down to zero on Swiss chocolate. So I don't, the focus is definitely on industrial goods and services, right? But again, when I said it was 100 and some, product categories, goods categories, this is huge. This is going to be like a buffet of all kinds of products, food and services. Now the farmers, there are details in there as far as agricultural goods and those things. Again, trying to protect their domestic farming and farmer production. But yeah,
Yeah.
but as far as consumer goods and industrial and technology and those kinds of things, it's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Long list.
Okay. Now, one of the other things too I saw was that there's language in the deal, and I think you mentioned it earlier that there's
Hmm.
some human rights obligations that are part of this deal.
Hmm.
When these trade deals are signed, how realistic is it that the language that's included here is actually going to be followed through on? I mean, are people going to be going over to India to check and see like, oh yeah, you're actually following through on your human rights commitments or whatever it was that was part of this?
Yeah, I don't believe there's any like audit or those kinds of things, but um, so what happens out there? There are global watchdog groups. We've seen that with the Uyghurs and other things that have been going on, child
Yeah.
labor, those kinds of things. So that is out there. So it does get surfaced. These watchdog groups, bring it to the world's attention, and then they'll adjudicate in the public space. And sometime name and shame, right? And so I would say that's probably more. There are international trade forums or things can be taken to and that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, I would say it's more like self-policing, some global governance, but mostly the watchdogs doing the heavy.
Okay.
Mhm.
Great. Now, one thing that came up while I was looking at this new deal, which was really recently signed or put
Yeah,
out there, is that this isn't the first major trade deal that India has signed
not
in
at
the
all.
past few years. I think you mentioned it earlier, the UK is in the final stages of a deal, but they also completed deals with the United Arab Emirates and Australia.
Hmm.
So India's making a lot of moves right now. What's going on there?
Yeah, I guess maybe step back from this, and again, demographics, right? So this was the case with the United States. Was the case with the rise of China, right? It's like this demographic dividend of kind of this bulging population growth, and you have this kind of youth bulge, right, where you have you know getting jobs and having families and consuming households and food and all those kinds of things. So that typically lasts maybe 2 to 3 decades at best. I mean, even
Yeah.
Japan went through this, right? So where are we? The US is an aging population as well, and if it wasn't for immigration, we would be on the downhill slide, right? China is definitely on the downhill slide. Japan is like, watch what they're doing, because that's a decade, where we can see our future, right? So all of these, makes India. So if you're a developed country right now, you want a piece of action in India. That's going to be, an engine, a real driver, especially, more broadly in Asia, but definitely India. And so they need to make hay now while they can, while they have this demographic dividend to really drive their economy. And so they're going to go out and do deals, right? And have trade relationships and be able to produce some, the manufacturing and services and all the things that they're doing, pharmaceuticals, opening those markets and driving their GDP. And I think there's real, uh, interest by the government in India to just push on the gas pedal and get as much as they can, because they know, their population will peak probably around, in, let's say, 2060, in that range, right?
Yeah.
But they're going to go from, over 1 billion people, which they now exceeded the population of China. They're going to peak out about 1.6 billion people, right? So they need jobs, and why in this, that was touted about, million new jobs and all this kind of thing. So that's what they're, that's the engine. They haven't really invested in their infrastructure like China has and the US. I mean, think about all the, interstate highways and all the things that we've built, bridges and facilities and airports. The India hasn't had that major investment, so they have all that growth in front of them, right? And so yeah, everybody wants to connect with India. India wants to be as neutral as they can be, like around the whole Ukraine situation. They want to, be the Switzerland of growth and economy and trade. So
Well, they're definitely seizing the moment right now. And this is you mentioned it a couple times.
Mhm.
You've talked about the demographic changes, but I mean, does this and these recent trade deals signal kind of a change in power in that region over there? Because we've always talked about China and they're producing all these
Mhm.
things, and we talk about huge trade deals with the China or tariffs or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Does this kind of signal that we need to be looking at, India as this rising power? Are they going to be, taken over there?
So the answer is yes. I think, not in the too distant past were, number 10, they're now number 5. They have their eye on
Oh,
being number 3. And as they continue to go, they very easily could be number 2. Given the China demographics, I'm pretty confident. And as long as we don't blow up the immigration, supercharging of the U.S., we'll be 1, they'll be 2, and China will be 3. But if we go to zero, immigration, then our population, instead of, kind of flattening out and continuing to bring in, youthful workers, immigrants drive our economy, we could see our population go from 400 million to like 220 million, right?
yeah,
Now that when I say 220, that's like half the population,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and again, in this same period, this, kind of, 2060 period. So, when we have all these immigration things, it's like, no, we need to solve this, because if we're going to continue to be the strength, and if we're going to continue to hold that pole position, we need infusion of workers, because otherwise we're going to end up like any other developed country that not have enough babies.
It's going to be a brave new world out there.
Right.
So we have touched on it a little bit,
Hmm.
but I mean, what does this really signal for the United States' trade relationship with India? Does it mean that we're going to be signing one of these big deals in the future here, and lowering barriers to get those Indian goods over here, or what's going on there?
So, I would say uh, the U.S. absolutely has been a major trading partner with India, right? So,
Yeah.
and they're going to be, want to be part of this action. They're not going to want to be left on the side of the road. We are India's biggest trading partner today.
Okay.
Okay, so we are, holding that. I think it's like a couple 100 billion. So, how do we strengthen that? How do we leverage? How do we advantage ourselves from that position? Is definitely, high on. Now, when you look at, that's us, that's them with us, right? So I'm sorry, with us, yeah. So what, which Mexico, as you recall, became the number one trading, inbound, imports partner,
Right.
and so, or trading partner, but from China, right? So, India is, I don't know, I think a minute amount compared to Mexico, what we're doing there. So there's plenty of growth opportunity in our trade relationship with India, and I think we'll see it, continue to grow and to expand, and see, bilateral opportunities, and continue to hold our position.
That's good. A
Mm,
rising tide raises all boats, right?
absolutely, yeah.
All right. So to close this out, I'm going to
Hmm.
steal Michelle's catchphrase here, which is
Okay.
where she asks you to look into that crystal ball at the end of the episode, which is, here we have this really big trade deal,
Hmm.
and we're not going to know the ramifications for a while, but trade deals are back and forth. You're always trying to, get the best for your country out of it.
Sure,
Who
win-win.
do you think?
Sure. Mhm.
Who do you think is coming out on top here? Who do you think got a better deal? India or the EFTA countries, or is it too early to tell?
So, I would say that there's definitely win-win for both parties, so it makes it a good deal, right?
Yeah,
But in the grand scheme of things, because of everything we talked about, that India needs direct investment, they're going to have this growing economy, that I would say they're the winner. It's like they're going to see, their economy getting a boost from this, right? Jobs and trade, and GDP growth, and the EFTA countries will be riding that wave. And so I would say, marginally, but strategically, India, I would say, comes out on top.
All right. Well, we'll have to we'll revisit this in a couple years and see what's going on there.
But
But
remember, it's, cause it's going to be probably a year at least, early 2025 before it actually is real. Then we'll start measuring.
there you go. All right, we'll measure it out from then.
Right.
But interesting topic, and thank you so much for the conversation, Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
Where can folks find you online if they want to hear more of your insights?
Sure. McIndoeRiskAdvisory.com or at the WTCI site as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And follow us online at WTC Institute. See you next week.